Good morning, everyone. I'm here with self-proclaimed YouTube star Stuart Barron. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here. Gosh, can I say hi to my mom and dad? No, you can't. Now, the question that's on everybody's mind, are you really so narcissistic that you think people are going to want to watch a video of you rambling about a single shot from a 13-year-old movie? Yeah. I don't know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I also thought I had it in me to replicate an Oscar-nominated performance for this opening bit, despite me having zero acting experience. Well, Stuart, I think I speak for all of us when I say I can't wait to see how many people click off this video right away because you just had to play filmmaker. Yeah, it's a scary thought. But for those of you who haven't tuned out, I'm gonna be honest, I initially considered starting this video talking about how important a title card can be for a movie, and how a good one can really help to set the tone, maybe by giving some examples of movies with title cards I've particularly liked. But then when I actually sat down and started writing this script, I realized I couldn't really think of many that stood out. Usually a movie's title card only ever aims to be serviceable, fulfilling an obligation, normally being at least somewhat visually unique or interesting, but doesn't usually tie into the story in a way that you're likely to remember. There's nothing wrong per se with taking this approach, but I think there is kind of a widespread neglect of something that can really add to a story if used properly. What do I mean by that? Well, take a look at 127 Hours, the 2010 movie based on Aaron Ralston, a man who got his arm trapped under a boulder in the middle of nowhere and had to amputate it after failing to move this fucking rock! Now, the most immediately obvious thing about this movie's title card is that it doesn't show up when you might expect. Most movies will either feature a title card either right at the start of the film, right at the end, or a few minutes in after an opening scene. But in this movie, the title card shows up a full 16 minutes in. That's 3 chapters into the scene selection on the DVD, and well after the point that most people would expect. Hell, there's even an opening credits scene at the very beginning of the film before this point. So why does it do that, and why do I like it so much? Well, let's take a look and see what happens before that 16-minute mark. The beginning section of this movie is very upbeat, has a very active sense of energy, and a fair amount happens. The movie begins with the hustle and bustle of everyday life, crowds of people wandering around, cars driving up and down a highway, and Ralston preparing for and making a long trip out into the empty mountainside of Utah. And once he arrives there, that sense of liveliness only gets more palpable.
Guidebook says 4.5 hours to the big drop rappel. I aim to take 45 minutes off that.
We get a fast-paced bike ride through the canyonlands with some blaring rock music, followed by some daredevil drops from a small gap in the canyon to an underground pool. Not to mention, the tone of this part of the movie is kept relatively light and fun. Ralston's trip to the canyon is really just intended as a pleasure trip over the weekend, nothing serious or all that important. Plus, he ends up spending part of the day with 2 other hikers that he meets and hits it off with. Initially, they're a little hesitant because he's got a scarf over his face, but he eases them in by taking it off. Personally, I don't think seeing that it's James Franco would help in that situation, but that's another story. But they end up having a grand old time. They joke around with each other, they're pretty chilled out and relaxed, and any problems they run into, they don't really seem to worry too much about. They eventually part ways, planning to meet up again.
Tomorrow night, we're actually, seriously, throwing a party if you want to come.
Yeah, you should come by, have a beer, kick back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sure that will go completely according to plan. I'm sure he won't end up in any kind of life-threatening scenario that these two will have no way of knowing about, resulting in them likely thinking that he stood them up, ruining what seemed like a promising new friendship. And throughout this entire day, the atmosphere of the location has been very pleasant with huge, wide open spaces, a sunny blue sky, vibrant, highly saturated colors both above and even below ground. You really get a feel for why Ralston loves the outdoors and out-of-the-way places like this, and you get invested in that sense of adventure and discovery that it brings. But at the same time, there are also hints of danger that Ralston doesn't seem to take as seriously as he should. like a steep cliff or a dark chasm that he just leaps right into. But you brush it off because he seems to know what he's doing. I mean, nothing majorly wrong has happened so far. Ralston continues exploring on his lonesome, again keeping the energy high with more rock music blasting in his headphones until he comes across a little crevice in the ground. And in keeping with what we've seen of Ralston so far, he goes to check it out. After exercising a minimal amount of caution and snapping a photo with this not great looking effect. Okay, quick aside. The movie in general is really well directed and edited for something that mostly takes place in one tiny area, but this one effect looks really off and looks like a transition from Windows Movie Maker. Anyway, after exercising a minimal amount of caution, he climbs down a deep shaft using a similar technique to what we saw from him earlier, pressing both his front and back of his body against the walls. There's probably a technical term for that, but I wouldn't know. I talk about movies and video games on the internet. Do I really seem like a rock climbing expert? But this particular maneuver looks a bit too close for comfort, even compared to what we've seen from him before. It's not like the last one, which was, as he put it,
a bit of a squeeze.
Here, the walls are barely close enough for him to keep a steady grip. And just as you start to question whether he's as capable as he seems to think he is, in the span of a couple of seconds, the tone completely changes. Ralston's happy-go-lucky attitude has been replaced by a sudden moment of shock and pain. His scream is muffled and the world around him is in slow motion as time practically freezes while the moment sinks in. The color palette in the crevice is dark and muted compared to what we've seen before, and the music from his headphones cuts out, leaving him in stunned silence as he now realizes not only is he hurt, he's trapped. And in case you thought this might be an easy problem to solve, the film itself lets you know how long it's going to take him to get out. Usually when a movie has a cold open followed by a title card, it's done to set the tone of the story you're about to watch, and the title card acts as a cherry on top, like for example, Thanos has slaughtered half of Asgard, murdered Loki, stolen the Space Stone, and beaten 2 of the Avengers to the point of retreat, and that's just the beginning of what he's going to do. Prepare for all this to unfold in Avengers Infinity War. But the funny thing about 127 hours is that it actually does the exact opposite of that. The 16-minute sequence at the beginning of the movie lulls you into a false sense of security with a laid-back, carefree tone only to eventually rip it away from you. And just as you're processing the change, the title card drops as if to say, okay, playtime's over. You see this scary, out-of-nowhere situation that the main character isn't prepared for? That's the movie you're getting. You best get comfortable. It's such an effective way of making the situation feel so sudden and really helps to put you into Ralston's headspace. Especially considering that by 16 minutes into the runtime, a title card is not what you're expecting, much like the situation that he's stuck in. Really the only thing that I think is kind of a shame is that so few movies seem to want to experiment with title cards like this. Most of them are content to follow the set-in-stone formula for how a title card is quote-unquote supposed to play out. That can be effective in its own right, and there are plenty of movies that have done it quite well. But me personally, I'm always going to reserve the title of my favorite to one that goes out of its way to experiment and innovate and do something that's going to stick with me. And for now anyway, that title is going to 127 hours. Like I said, I couldn't think of many other examples of title cards like this, so if you know of any, please let me know. I'd be very curious to see. Or maybe you'll suggest a movie that I've already seen and I'll smack myself in the head for forgetting it. Let's see what happens. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, then consider supporting me on Patreon in the link below, where you'll get to see early releases of all my videos.
See ya!
Bye.